Why did no one ever notice her? The question lingered in the background of every morning at Forward Operating Base Phoenix. Rows of soldiers filing into formation, officers scanning clipboards, engines coughing to life. And there she was, Staff Sergeant Nova Anderson, crouched low beside a truck's engine, hands buried in grease, hair tied back in a regulation bun that somehow made her blend even more into the shadows. Nobody paid her much attention. Nobody ever asked where she'd been the night before, or why she seemed to know the inner life of every machine on base as if they were breathing creatures. To them, she was just the mechanic, the wrench, the quiet girl who didn't talk much, who kept her head down, who got things working again when everything else broke. But Nova knew there was a reason she'd chosen invisibility, a reason why silence felt safer than being seen. That morning, the mountain air bit through the thin fabric of her uniform, sharp and dry, carrying the smell of diesel fuel and dust. Soldiers bustled in the motorpool yard, loading supply trucks, running pre-checks, shouting orders over the clanging of metal. Nova barely looked up. Her hands worked by memory, loosening bolts, shifting hoses, resetting timing belts. She let the noise wash over her like static. She was present, but not. She had trained herself to disappear in plain sight. But as she leaned into the open hood, she caught herself listening more than usual. The base radio crackled faintly in the control office. Call signs, grids, clipped voices reading off patrol statuses. None of it was unusual. And yet, there was a tension in her chest she couldn't explain. Something pulling at her gut, the way instincts do when they know what your conscious mind refuses to admit. She brushed it away. Just another day, just another engine. Still, why did everyone ignore her? Maybe because she wanted it that way. Maybe because she'd made herself easy to ignore. But deep down, beneath the coveralls and grease stains, there was a truth that never left her. If they knew who she really was, no one would dare look through her again. At 1400 hours, the truth tapped her on the shoulder. Her encrypted phone, hidden beneath the bench where she kept her socket sets, buzzed with a vibration so faint only she could have felt it. The sound of another soldier's phone would have been nothing. But this wasn't another soldier's phone. It was the kind of device that technically didn't exist. Only 12 people in the world had the clearance to send what appeared on the small screen. 3 words: package compromised. And then the directive: execute protocol Valkyrie. Her hand stilled over the wrench. Not even a tremor betrayed her face, but inside, something shifted. 3 years she had been waiting. 3 years since she had been burned, her name erased from files that never officially admitted her existence in the first place. 3 years of pretending to be broken, of pretending to step away from combat because of stress and exhaustion. 3 years of watching grease soak into her nails and her life shrink into a garage. But she hadn't been broken. She had been hidden, placed into deep cover, waiting for the moment someone might need the Phantom again. And today someone had. Nova slipped the wrench back into its slot, wiped her hands on the rag hanging from her belt, and stood. She glanced once over the motorpool yard, soldiers laughing at a joke, a corporal kicking at a stubborn tire, engines whining in the distance. No one looked at her. That was the beauty of it. She walked calmly into the communications room where Sergeant Williams sat monitoring radio traffic. He barely glanced at her. "Williams, I need to review last night's patrol reports," she said, voice casual. His eyebrows drew together. "Motorpool needs patrol reports." "Vehicle usage logs," she replied without hesitation. "Need to know who's putting extra stress on transmissions, keeps the paperwork clean." It was just technical enough, just boring enough to be believed. Williams shrugged, pulled up the digital files, and handed her the screen. Nova's eyes scanned line after line, checkpoints passed, routes cleared, everything routine, until she reached it. SEAL Team Bravo departed 2200 hours. Reconnaissance mission Shepherd's Watch. Expected return 600. Current status overdue 8 hours. No contact. Her stomach dropped, but her expression didn't change. capture or death. She thanked Williams and returned to her garage. Each step felt heavier than the last, though her gait remained steady. In the dim light of the garage, she knelt beneath her workbench and unlocked the compartment no mechanic was supposed to have. The hinges creaked quietly. Inside, her other life. Encrypted sat phone, tactical gear wrapped in oilcloth, a weapons cache assembled piece by piece, disguised as replacement parts ordered over the years. She connected the sat phone to a number that had no official record. The line clicked. "Control, this is Phantom, package status." A long pause, then a voice low, steady. "Phantom Control, package compromised, 6 assets confirmed, captured by hostile elements. Grid coordinates 41.7258 north, 44.6372 east. Enemy strength 40+. Rescue impossible through conventional means." Nova inhaled, slow and steady. 40 enemy fighters, 1 compound, 6 hostages, no official rescue. "Control," she said, her voice calm, almost too calm. "Requesting full tactical package and real-time intelligence." The reply came like a knife. "Negative, Phantom, this is off books. No support, no backup, no acknowledgement. Are you accepting assignment?" The silence after that question pressed in on her. She thought of the 3 years she had spent pretending to be nothing. She thought of the seals, bound and broken somewhere in the mountains. She thought of all the engines she had repaired to keep the war machine moving, while the part of her that had once made her feared across continents was left to rust. "Yes," she whispered, "beginning preparation, Phantom out." She ended the call. The weight of it pressed down on her shoulders, but not as a burden. It was familiar. This was who she was, even if the others never knew. And yet, as she began laying out her gear, the custom HK-416, the Remington sniper, the Glock sidearm, the explosives kit, a thought gnawed at her edges. Why her? Why only her? 40 trained fighters against one woman who hadn't fired a live round in 3 years. Was she ready? Or had she become the thing everyone else believed her to be, the wrench, the grease-stained ghost in the corner of the motorpool? She forced the doubt down. Doubt killed more soldiers than bullets. But the question didn't leave. She checked the rifles with methodical precision, sighting optics, checking suppressors, loading rounds with hands that did not shake. She touched the cold steel of the small black device she had once sworn she'd never use again, the jammer, capable of cutting enemy communications like a scythe through tall grass. Her reflection caught faintly in the glass of a windshield she'd been working on earlier. Oil smudged on her cheek, hair pulled tight, eyes too old for 27. She stared at herself for a long moment. And then she asked it again. Why had they chosen her? The answer wasn't clear. Maybe because she was the only one who could move without leaving a trace. Maybe because the world had run out of options. Maybe because some missions weren't meant to be survivable. The encrypted phone had buzzed once more, a short coded ping, confirmation of receipt, a final reminder. No extraction guaranteed. She slipped her knife into its sheath, holstered her sidearm, and rolled her shoulders. The grease under her nails would stay part of the cover, but everything else about her was gone. When Major Davidson signed off on her overnight parts run later that evening, he didn't even glance at her twice. She was just wrench, just another tired mechanic leaving in a dusty truck. He had no idea he had just authorized a mission no one would ever admit existed. And as the gates opened and the night swallowed her, Nova asked herself one last time. Why her? The answer hadn't come yet. But it would. What did a mechanic's truck have to do with war? That was the first question Nova asked herself as she drove through the checkpoint, headlights washing pale light across the concrete barriers. The guards barely looked at her. Wrench was just heading out for parts, same as she had a dozen times before. Nothing suspicious about that. But 20 minutes later, out of sight of the base, She pulled the vehicle over to the shoulder of the rugged mountain road and killed the lights. The silence of the night pressed in. The only sound was her own breathing, steady but sharper than usual. She slid down from the cab and circled the vehicle, boots crunching gravel. To anyone else, it was just another repair truck. To Nova, it was a disguise layered over months of preparation. Beneath the rust-streaked exterior was hidden armor plating, compartments with weapons and gear, modifications no motorpool commander had ever authorized. Tonight the disguise came off. She stripped her coveralls, the smell of oil and sweat clinging to the fabric, and folded them neatly on the seat. Beneath, tactical clothing hugged her frame, dark and silent. She laced on her combat boots, soles designed to absorb sound. Her hair vanished beneath a helmet wired with night vision and comms. Piece by piece the mechanic dissolved. Piece by piece Phantom returned. She pulled her HK-416 from its hidden compartment, the suppressor already fitted, optics aligned. She felt the weight of the Remington sniper rifle as she slung it across her back, the kind of weight that felt like reassurance. Her hands hovered over each weapon in turn, testing, remembering, reacquainting herself with the tools that once defined her life. Every magazine loaded, every explosive primed, every knife sharpened, every contingency accounted for. The transformation took 20 minutes. When she was finished, the only reminder of Wrench, the quiet girl who fixed engines, was the oil still embedded in her fingernails. She stood for a moment in the dark, staring at the mountains ahead, 40 men, one compound, and her. The numbers didn't add up. They weren't supposed to. But then again, she wasn't supposed to exist. She climbed back into the cab, started the engine, and drove north, headlights off. 2 hours later, she was crouched 800 meters from the compound, rifle braced, scope pressed to her eye. The fortress rose against the ridgeline, its walls and guard towers bathed in pale moonlight. Sentries moved with unsettling discipline, irregular patrol patterns, staggered routes. Someone had trained them well. Through the scope, she counted trucks fitted with heavy machine guns, each positioned to cover different approaches. It wasn't just a camp. It was a fortress built for war. Her jaw clenched. She had assaulted fortifications before, always with teams, always with backup, always with air support. Tonight she had none. So she waited, patient, breathing steady, letting the night tell her what it wanted her to see. The first weakness appeared after 40 minutes. The generator churning at the base of the hill, its fence lit by a single bulb. One guard, not two, not rotating, just one. She exhaled slowly, phase 1. Sliding from the rocks, she became shadow. The earth shifted beneath her boots, but not a sound escaped. She glided through the dark until the fence loomed before her. The guard shifted his weight, yawning, his rifle slung carelessly. He never turned. Her knife entered and exited in silence. His body folded against her shoulder. She dragged him behind the generator, where the shadows swallowed him whole. One body, 39 to go. She knelt at the fuel line, hands working as if she were back in the garage. Except this wasn't about getting an engine to run. This was about killing the heartbeat of a compound. When the charge blew, everything would go dark. She stood brushing dirt from her gloves and melted back into the rocks. Her heart hammered once, twice, then steadied. Phase 2. She circled the compound's outer wall, steps measured, her breathing counting the rhythm of the patrols. 2 guards on the south perimeter, predictable, poorly spaced. She sank deeper into shadow. When the first passed, she slid behind him, her arm across his throat, the knife puncturing quick and clean. His body sagged soundlessly into her arms. The second turned at the faint crunch of gravel, but what he saw was the barrel of a suppressed rifle. The whisper of the shot barely echoed. He fell without a sound. 2 more bodies, 37. She slipped through the breach. The compound swallowed her. Buildings loomed, concrete gray, windows barred. She moved low, hugging walls, scanning corners, her eyes darting to every flicker of movement. Somewhere inside, 6 men were tied, beaten, waiting for rescue that would never come, unless she reached them. But where? She halted near the central structure, reinforced walls, barred windows, guards at the entrance, and through the glass shadows, figures bound to chairs. One of them lifted his head, swollen face turning toward the window. Her pulse stuttered, seals alive. Relief swept her like fire, not body recovery, extraction, but relief gave way quickly to calculation. She needed chaos. She needed distraction. She needed the enemy blind and deaf. So she planted charges, one at the communications building, one at the motorpool where their truck slept, one at the guard tower. Each charge wired, each detonation a piece of the storm she was about to unleash. Then she retreated to cover, rifle steady, eyes fixed on the compound. The watch on her wrist ticked to 23:34. She pressed the detonator. The generator blew first. Flames burst skyward, swallowing the night in light before plunging everything into darkness. Shouts erupted, chaotic, scrambling. Then the charges sang. 1, 2, 3. Explosions tore the compound's heart apart. The guard tower collapsed in a roar. The motorpool ignited, fuel tanks erupting into fireballs that painted the sky red. The comms building shattered, antennas snapping like matchsticks. The night became thunder, and Nova became a ghost. Her rifle whispered death into the confusion. One man dropped from a rooftop, another from a tower, another fell mid-shout before his command left his lips. Suppressed fire hissed into the dark, each shot surgical, each target collapsing before they could even aim. They tried to respond, to regroup, to fire into the night, but their radios were dead, their lights gone, their leader's voice silenced by jamming. She owned the chaos. And yet, under the adrenaline, something else stirred, a heaviness, a thought she hadn't let herself consider. Every man she dropped had a name once, a mother, a reason they'd picked up a rifle. Maybe some had chosen this path, maybe some hadn't, but tonight their choices ended here beneath her crosshairs. She pressed the thought down. There was no room for it now, but it lingered like smoke, threading through the efficiency of her hands. Her scope fixed on the prison building. Guards clustered outside, firing blindly into the night. They didn't know where death was coming from. They only knew it was already among them. One by one, she cut them down. Suppressed rounds punched silently into the dark. The last guard dropped his rifle and ran. She didn't fire. She let him go. The door was clear. Her boots carried her forward, body low, rifle up. She moved like instinct, like memory. Inside, the air was heavy with sweat and smoke. She knew the ambush would come, knew they'd be waiting. They were. At the hallway junction, 4 rifles waited, aimed at the corridor. But Nova hadn't come through the corridor. She'd come through the wall. The explosive she set ripped open concrete in a deafening crack. Dust choked the air, and through it she moved, rifle spitting precision. 1, 2, 3, 4 seconds, that was all it took. Then silence. She lowered her rifle, chest heaving. Dust hung in the air like fog. The room at the end of the hall glowed faintly, barred windows casting thin strips of moonlight. Inside, 6 men sat bound, bloodied, bruised, but alive. One lifted his head, the leader, his lips cracked in something close to a smile. "Took you long enough, wrench." Her throat tightened, not from shock, not from the danger, but from something else, recognition. "Had to find a parking spot," she answered, voice dry, almost steady. Her knife sliced the ropes free. The SEALs rubbed their wrists, winced at their injuries, but when she shoved rifles into their hands, they gripped them like lifelines. "Situation," their leader rasped. 40 hostiles, now closer to 25. Compound compromised. Comms down, vehicles gone, we move on foot. His eyes searched hers, a question forming, the same question she'd asked herself. How did one mechanic destroy a fortress? But he didn't voice it. He only nodded, clutching the weapon as if it were the only thing holding him upright. "Then we move," he said. Nova inhaled once, sharp and steady. The doubt was still there gnawing, but so was the fire. She had started the storm. Now she had to lead them through it. How many lives could one person carry on their shoulders? It wasn't just a question. It was the weight pressing into Nova's chest as she moved through the ruined corridors with 6 battered men trailing her. The compound groaned with smoke and flame. Bodies littered the floors, some sprawled across debris, others slumped against walls in silent testimony. Every step she took was careful, calculated, yet beneath her calm something churned. She hadn't fought like this in years, not since Blackwater, not since she'd been burned, and part of her had feared that the edge would be gone. But the bodies around her told a different story. Her edge hadn't dulled, it had sharpened. Still, as the seals followed, limping, bloodied, whispering quiet curses under their breath, she felt a crack in the steel she carried. These weren't just men she was pulling from hell. They were a mirror. They were who she used to be, elite, untouchable, until the day the mission collapsed. Was this her redemption, or just another tally of ghosts she'd drag into silence? She didn't let the thought distract her. She pushed it down and signaled to the team with 2 fingers. "Move, quiet, stay on me." The corridors led to the shattered courtyard. Smoke curled from the wreckage of the guard tower. Flames clawed the night sky from the motorpool. Sporadic gunfire cracked in the distance as panicked militants tried to regroup. Nova crouched behind a broken wall, eyes darting across the chaos. She spotted the machine gun nest by the gate, barrels still smoking. 3 men crouched low, sweeping arcs of fire into shadows they couldn't see. If the SEALs tried to push through, they'd be shredded. She exhaled, pulled a grenade from her vest. The pin clicked free. Her hand arced high. The grenade clattered against stone, rolled, and exploded in a thunderous bloom of smoke and fire. The men never screamed. They didn't have time. Nova surged forward, rifle raised, providing cover fire as the SEALs stumbled after her. Their weapons barked, rough and imprecise compared to her precise whispers, but it was enough. Enough to punch a hole through the gate, enough to buy them the night. Outside, the mountain air hit like ice. Cold, sharp, cutting through the adrenaline. The men gasped as they pushed forward, dragging one another when their injuries threatened to slow them down. But Nova didn't stop, couldn't stop. 2 clicks north, she hissed over her shoulder. "Truck staged, we move fast, we move silent, stay low." Lieutenant Commander Hayes grunted as he caught up to her, blood seeping through the bandage she'd slapped on his side. "You're telling me you walked in here alone and tore this place apart?" "Job description changed recently," she muttered, scanning the ridgeline. He almost laughed, but the sound broke into a cough. "Goddamn mechanic." The words hit her strangely. Half joke, half truth, she didn't answer. Behind them, the compound roared with the shouts of militants. Searchlights flickered to life. Figures spilled from buildings, rifles flashing in wild arcs. They were coming. Nova led the team into the blackness of the mountain paths. The ground shifted underfoot, jagged rock, loose gravel, treacherous cliffs that waited for a misstep. The night pressed heavy against them, but Nova's vision cut through the dark. She scanned every shadow, every movement, every sound. The SEALs tried to keep up, but exhaustion weighed on them. Some limped. One nearly collapsed, knees buckling before another soldier caught him under the arm. Their breathing grew ragged, loud enough to make Nova flinch. The night had ears, and the enemy was listening. She slowed her pace, enough to keep them together, but not enough to give the enemy time to close the gap. And then gunfire cracked. Bullets hissed through the air, sparking against stone. The militants had fanned out, chasing, their voices rising in shouts of anger. They were on the hunt, their numbers still overwhelming despite the chaos she'd carved into them. Nova dropped to one knee, rifle snapping into her shoulder. Her shots were deliberate, surgical. Each crack of her suppressor dropped another figure into the dust. The SEALs joined her, their weapons barking louder, less controlled, but their firepower added noise to her precision. "Keep moving," she ordered, voice sharp, steady. "Don't stop unless I say." They obeyed, scrambling forward, ducking low. Hayes fired a burst into the dark, his body shaking but his aim steady enough. Another SEAL dragged his wounded teammate forward, cursing under his breath with each step. Nova fell back, covering them, her mind running faster than her pulse. She couldn't kill them all. Not here. Not like this. The mountain was too open, the terrain too unforgiving. If they got bogged down, if they hesitated, they'd be surrounded. She needed another storm. Her hand brushed the detonator clip to her vest. She still had one charge left, one that she hadn't used in the compound. She glanced at the terrain. A narrow pass, cliffs on either side, loose rock above waiting to be dislodged. "Perfect. Go," she shouted, waving the SEALs forward. "Don't look back, just move." They didn't question. They trusted, maybe because they had no other choice. She stayed behind, crouched low, thumb pressing the detonator. The charge she'd hidden earlier, insurance, answered in a roar that shook the mountains. The explosion ripped into the rock face, sending tons of stone crashing down into the pass. The militants screamed. Dust and boulders buried their advance. The night shook with thunder. Nova rose, chest heaving, smoke coating her lungs. She watched the collapse settle, the enemy trapped beyond the landslide. It wasn't permanent. They'd find another path, but it bought her time, bought them all time. She turned and sprinted after the SEALs. She found them huddled in a shallow ravine, catching their breath. Their eyes were wide, reflecting the faint glow of fires burning in the distance. "You just buried half a mountain," one muttered, voice trembling with exhaustion and awe. "Maintenance issue," Nova replied flatly, kneeling to check Hayes' wound. But inside, the heaviness pressed harder. Maintenance. That was the lie she lived, the grease-stained cover. And yet, tonight she wasn't fixing engines. She was deciding who lived and who didn't. She was choosing whose sons and brothers would never walk out of that valley alive. She bandaged Hayes tighter, ignoring his hiss of pain. "Truck's closed," she said. "We move before they regroup." The SEALs rose, shoulders squared, weapons clutched. They were hurting, but they were moving. That was enough. Nova led them again, every step a battle between the calm operator and the storm inside her. The killings blurred in her mind, each one necessary, each one efficient. But still, when she blinked, she saw faces, heard echoes of voices that would never rise again. Was she a rescuer, or just another executioner? The question burned as they pushed through the dark. An hour later, the truck loomed ahead, hidden beneath a camouflage net she had stretched days earlier. The SEALs froze, staring at the modified vehicle, its armor plating glinting faintly in the moonlight, its compartments bristling with silent firepower. "What the hell is this?" Hayes whispered. Nova climbed into the driver's seat, starting the engine without looking at him. "Vehicle maintenance," she said. The truck rumbled to life, growling like something alive. She drove hard, tires skidding over gravel, the road winding like a serpent through the mountains. Behind them, the fires of the compound still burned, smoke curling high into the night. No one spoke, not for a long time. Finally, Hayes leaned forward from the passenger seat, voice quiet. "You did this alone." She kept her eyes on the road. "We did this together." He shook his head slowly, gaze fixed on her profile, as if trying to read a language he didn't understand. "You're not just a mechanic." She didn't answer, because the truth wasn't something she could give him, not yet. Not ever. The road stretched on, the night swallowing them whole. But Nova knew one thing with certainty. She had saved 6 lives tonight, and ended 40. And the weight of both would never leave her. Why was the base so quiet when she returned? The question tugged at Nova as she steered the truck back into the perimeter of forward operating base Phoenix. The sun had not yet risen. The world was caught in that fragile gray before dawn when even soldiers moved slower, their fatigue weighing heavy from endless rotations. She slowed at the checkpoint. The guards waved her through without checking the cab. To them, it was just Sergeant Anderson, motorpool wrench, back from a late-night run for parts. They didn't see the scratches on the truck's undercarriage. They didn't notice the smoke clinging faintly to her clothes. They couldn't smell the fire in her hair, the powder burned into her skin. They didn't know that less than an hour earlier she had been death in the dark. She parked the truck in the bay like nothing had happened. The SEALs, battered but alive, were already being rushed toward the medical facility under strict orders to keep quiet. Nova didn't watch them go, didn't allow herself to linger. If she did, someone might notice. So she stayed in character. Hands back in grease, tools clattering softly against steel, engine compartments open beneath the glow of overhead lamps. It was easier than expected. No one questioned her. No one stared too long. The base commander had no reason to wonder why the mechanic looked tired, why her shoulders seemed heavier, why her eyes were shadowed. And yet the silence around her was deafening. Hours passed. Soldiers came and went, asking about transmission parts, fuel injectors, brake lines. She answered them all in clipped tones, the same way she always had. She even managed a faint smile when Corporal Ruiz brought her coffee and teased, "Don't work yourself to death, wrench." She nodded, took the cup, and returned to her workbench. But inside, something rattled loose. She had killed 40 men last night, 40. Each one a shot, a stab, a choice, each one necessary, each one permanent. And yet here she was, tightening bolts, wiping her hands, pretending the only lives she ever touched were engines. Why was no one asking questions? Why was the world acting as if nothing had shifted? Nova knew the answer, of course, because it was easier not to look too closely at her. It always had been. She had built her invisibility carefully, piece by piece, until she became background noise. And now that invisibility was her shield. But for the first time in years, she wasn't sure she wanted it. At 800, Major Davidson strode into the motor pool, his boots striking concrete in sharp rhythm. He paused by her workbench, hands on his hips. "Anderson," he said briskly, "heard there was some kind of incident with SEAL Team Bravo last night. Don't know the details yet, but their vehicles are going to need a full inspection." Nova didn't look up from the carburetor she was scrubbing. "Yes, sir. I'll get right on it." Davidson studied her for a moment. She could feel his eyes weighing, calculating. But then he nodded. "Good. And Anderson, nice work keeping our fleet running. We couldn't function without reliable mechanics." "Thank you, sir," she replied, voice flat. When he walked away, she allowed herself a breath, just one. Because behind her calm, the questions swirled again. Reliable mechanics. That was what he saw. That was what everyone saw. But if he knew, if anyone knew, would they still say the same thing? Or would they look at her with the same fear she saw in the eyes of dying men? Her encrypted phone buzzed quietly against her thigh. A single message. "Package delivered. Well done, Phantom." Nova stared at it for a long time. Then she deleted it. The screen went black as if nothing had ever been there. She picked up her wrench and returned to the engine. The hours blurred. Soldiers came and went. Engines sputtered and roared back to life, and all the while Nova kept her mask firmly in place. But at night, when the motor pool was empty and the silence pressed too close, the weight returned. The smell of burning fuel, the faces in her scope, the sound of her knife sliding through the dark. It wasn't guilt exactly. She had long ago learned to carry death without flinching, but it was something heavier. The knowledge that she could never share it, never speak it aloud. The truth was locked inside her chest, clawing for space. And then 6 months later, the lock broke open. The silver star. She hadn't expected it. When she was summoned to the secure facility, she thought it would be another debrief, another round of questions asked in rooms with no windows. But instead, she found herself standing before a panel of senior officers, her name read aloud with a medal she could never wear in public. Her speech was short, it had to be. "Some problems can't be solved with standard procedures," she told them, her voice steady. "Sometimes you need someone who thinks differently, works differently, isn't afraid to get their hands dirty. The mission succeeded because we used the right tool for the job." Applause filled the small room, sharp and sterile. And then, just as quickly, it was over. No photographs, no news reports, no recognition outside those walls. She returned to the motorpool the next day, the medal hidden in a drawer, grease back on her fingers. Soldiers called her wrench like nothing had changed. But something had. Word spread, not officially but in whispers. Stories leaked into the barracks, speculation filling the gaps where reports refused to go. 6 SEALs rescued without casualties. A compound destroyed by a ghost. 40 enemy fighters dead in a single night. The whispers reached foreign ears, too. Advisors called it operationally impossible, tactically unprecedented. Some even refused to believe it had been one person. But Nova knew the truth. And so did a select few who came for her 3 weeks later in a black SUV with diplomatic plates. She had been working on a transmission when the vehicle rolled into the motor pool. 2 men stepped out, their clothes civilian but their posture military. Intelligence, she knew instantly. "Staff Sergeant Anderson," one of them said quietly, "we need to discuss your recent overtime work." Her pulse slowed, steady, the mask held. She set down the wrench and followed them without a word. Inside the secure briefing building, she faced a panel of officials, military, civilian, intelligence. Faces that carried clearance high enough to silence entire wars. One woman leaned forward, her suit pristine, her eyes sharp. "Your performance during Operation Valkyrie has generated considerable interest at the highest levels of national security. We have questions." Nova's hands curled behind her back. Her voice, when it came, was calm. "Ma'am, I'm not sure what operation you're referring to. I've been assigned to vehicle maintenance for 3 years." The lie slid off her tongue like habit. But then a voice cut through the air. "Cut the act, Phantom." Her chest tightened. She knew that voice. Colonel Marcus Webb, her old Delta commander. He stepped forward, laying photographs across the table, before and after shots of the compound. Smoke, rubble bodies, 40 confirmed kills, 6 prisoners alive. 40 hostiles neutralized, 6 American assets recovered, 0 friendly casualties, he said flatly. That ratio doesn't exist, except you. The room waited, silent, expectant. Nova stared at the images, the devastation she had wrought, the evidence of a night no one was supposed to know. And in that silence, the question rose again. Why her? The answer was coming. She could feel it, sharp and heavy. But part of her already knew. Because some mechanics weren't meant to fix engines. They were meant to fix problems no one else could even name. What exactly were they asking of her? That was the thought running circles in Nova's mind as she stood in the briefing room, the smell of coffee and polished wood clashing with the burned rubber memories still lodged in her head. Around her, the panel of officials waited, their faces carved in stone, their voices calm, their words deliberate. They weren't here to congratulate her. They weren't even here to reprimand her for operating alone in enemy territory. They were here because they wanted more. The woman in the dark suit folded her hands across the table. Her nails were perfect. Her expression was not. Situations like Valkyrie, she said evenly, are becoming more frequent. Conventional responses are failing. Political channels are constrained, but we cannot afford failure. Nova kept her stance rigid, back straight, chin level. She had learned long ago that silence was sometimes the only weapon that mattered. Colonel Webb broke the pause. We're building something new, a network. Operators positioned where no one would think to look. Deep cover, not snipers on rooftops or door kickers in black helicopters. Mechanics, cooks, clerks, the invisible backbone of every base. His voice dropped steady, weighted with intent. People who can fix things permanently. The words landed like a hammer. Nova didn't flinch, but inside something stirred. She thought of the motorpool, of grease-stained hands and tired engines, of soldiers walking past her every day without a second glance. She had lived the invisibility. She had worn it like armor. And now they wanted to weaponize it. "Why me?" she asked finally, her voice low, rough. Webb's eyes didn't blink. "Because you already know how to disappear, and because you proved last month that even in deep cover when the storm came, you didn't hesitate. Most people break after years of hiding. You didn't. You stayed sharp. You stayed dangerous." Another official leaned forward, tapping a secure tablet to life. A map lit up, pins scattered across continents, flashpoints, hostage crises, rogue cells, shadow wars no one admitted were happening. "These are the problems no one will ever read about," the woman in the suit said. "The ones we can't solve with airstrikes or public deployments. We need people who can be there already, blending in, invisible until the moment they act." Nova let her eyes trace the map. Each pin a story, each story a risk, each risk a weight that would never see daylight. She thought of the 40 men in Kakovia, the way their bodies had dropped one by one. Necessary, yes, but invisible. No one would mourn them. No one would even admit they had been there. Would she spend the rest of her life cleaning up problems that weren't supposed to exist? "Sergeant Anderson," Webb said, softer now, "I know what you're asking yourself. Is this just another way to burn you out like Blackwater, to bury you under ghosts?" It is. It's giving you a mission that fits who you are. You're a mechanic. You fix what's broken. This is just maintenance on a bigger scale. The words cut deeper than she expected. Maintenance. The one thing she had never stopped doing. She didn't answer. The silence stretched long, the weight of her choice pressing heavier with each second. Finally she said, "What happens if I refuse?" The woman's expression didn't change. "You'll go back to fixing engines. You'll keep your cover. And one day, when another Valkyrie happens and we don't have you in place, more men will die. Maybe Americans, maybe allies, maybe civilians. Refusal is an option, but it carries a cost." Nova's throat tightened. She thought of Hayes, of the look in his eyes when she cut his restraints, when he realized she had walked alone into hell to pull him out. That look was gratitude, yes, but it was also disbelief. Disbelief that one woman could carry that much weight. And if she refused now, who would carry it the next time? The room held its breath, waiting for her. Nova looked down at the photographs of the destroyed compound spread across the table. Black smoke, rubble, 40 confirmed kills, 6 lives saved. The math wasn't fair. It never was, but it was real. And so was she. She raised her eyes steady. "I accept." Colonel Webb exhaled, the faintest smile ghosting across his face. The woman in the suit nodded once, tapping a key on the tablet. The map zoomed in, revealing more details. "Welcome to the most important job you'll never be able to discuss," Webb said. "From this moment on, you are still Sergeant Anderson. You still run the motorpool. You still carry grease under your nails. But now, when the message comes, you will be ready to fix what no one else can." The briefing stretched on, hours filled with protocols, communication channels, contingency planning. Nova absorbed every detail with the same quiet focus she had once reserved for weapon schematics. The world shifted around her as they spoke, not visibly, not outwardly, but inside her chest. She wasn't just a phantom anymore. She was a mechanic in a network of ghosts. And when they dismissed her, when she stepped back into the sunlight outside the briefing building, the air felt heavier, not with dread, with inevitability. Later that night, back in her garage, she stared at her reflection in a side mirror smeared with dust. For a long time, she didn't move. Her face was the same, brown hair, grease on her cheek, eyes too sharp for 27. But something fundamental had shifted. She thought of the medal locked in her drawer, of the map scattered with pins, of the missions already waiting. And then she whispered to herself, almost too softly to hear. Maintenance. The word didn't feel like a cover anymore. It felt like the truth. Because fixing things, even broken missions, even broken men, even broken wars, was what she had always done. And from now on, she would do it in the shadows. Why was she being sent somewhere even more dangerous? The thought followed Nova as the transport plane cut low over the Cormarmac Peninsula. Through the tiny porthole, the land stretched below in jagged scars, dry ridges, broken valleys, rivers that cut like knives through rock. It was a place where borders blurred, claimed by 3 nations and controlled by none. The briefing had been simple. Officially, she was reassigned as motorpool supervisor. Unofficially, she was the new invisible guardian of one of the most volatile regions on the planet. She touched the dog-eared notebook in her pocket, the same one she used for part numbers and service schedules. Inside, hidden among fuel diagrams, were notes from her secure briefing: smuggling routes, safe houses, suspected militant cells. She wasn't coming here to fix trucks. She was coming here to fix problems. The base itself was smaller than Phoenix, but newer. Prefabricated buildings squatted in the dust, their walls painted tan to blend into the hills. A dozen armored vehicles lined the lot, most already showing the strain of harsh terrain. Soldiers moved between the barracks and command posts, their faces tight with fatigue. Nova stepped off the transport with her duffel slung over one shoulder, grease already smeared across her coveralls. Just another mechanic, just another soldier nobody would look at twice. The motor pool was hers within hours. Rows of bays, racks of parts, a few junior mechanics who treated her with the same indifference she had grown used to. She gave them simple orders, checked inventory, tightened bolts with her own hands. And when the sun went down, she found the compartment hidden beneath the tool cabinets, delivered days earlier by supply shipments. Inside was everything she needed to stop being invisible when the time came. The time didn't take long. On her 3rd day, while she was elbow-deep in an APC's transmission, her encrypted phone buzzed once against her thigh. The vibration was subtle. The meaning was not. She pulled off her gloves and checked the screen. Package malfunction requires immediate attention. Grid coordinates attached. Her pulse slowed, the old rhythm returning, the switch flipping inside her chest. She read the numbers twice. 20 kilometers northeast, hostile canyon, intelligence uncertain. She slipped the phone away and wiped her hands on a rag. Transmission's almost done, she told the corporal hovering nearby. I'll finish it after chow. He nodded, unconcerned, and walked off. Nova packed her kit with silent precision. Rifle, sidearm, knives, explosives, night vision. The jammer device that could silence radios and cameras with the flick of a switch. Everything slid into its place. Within the hour, the mechanic was gone. Phantom was moving. The night wrapped around her as she drove the modified truck across broken ground, headlights dark, engine muted by tweaks she had engineered herself. The canyon swallowed her quickly, its walls rising steep and sheer. She stopped 2 kilometers out and went the rest on foot. The ground was treacherous, loose rock shifting under her boots, but she moved like a ghost. Her scope scanned the canyon floor. There, 2 American contractors, bound against the base of a rock wall. One barely conscious, the other struggling weakly against his restraints. Around them, armed men lingered in the shadows, rifles slung, their posture careless. Smugglers, mercenaries, maybe militants. The lines blurred here, but they were armed, they were hostile, and they were using Americans as leverage. Nova's jaw clenched. She steadied her rifle. One shot. A guard dropped, body crumpling silently into the dust. Another turned, startled, and fell before he could raise his weapon. The canyon erupted in shouts. Nova shifted positions, her rifle whispering death into the chaos. Each shot clean, each target falling before they understood what hunted them. But then a sound cut through the night, the sharp crack of a round striking near her cover. They had spotted the glint of her scope. She rolled, shifting to her sidearm, firing 3 suppressed shots into the muzzle flash. The cries confirmed the hits. Then silence. She scanned, bodies sprawled on the ground, no movement. She moved fast, sliding down the canyon wall, boots digging into rock. Her knife flashed as she cut the ropes binding the captives. One groaned in pain, the other whispered a broken, "Thank you." "No time," she said. "On your feet we move." They staggered, leaning against her shoulders as she guided them toward the north ridge. Her ears strained for movement, for the sound of reinforcements, but the canyon stayed quiet. Too quiet. Halfway up the ridge, a figure burst from the shadows, rifle raised. Nova's knife was faster. She closed the gap in 2 strides, blade slicing across his throat. His body toppled, silent, forgotten. Her chest heaved, but her hands remained steady as she pulled the captives onward. Minutes later, the truck loomed ahead, camouflaged beneath netting. She loaded the men inside, slammed the door, and climbed into the driver's seat. The engine roared, tires spitting gravel as she tore through the night. Behind them, the canyon faded into darkness, leaving only bodies and silence. By dawn, the contractors were safe inside the base's medical bay. Medics swarmed, voices urgent, hands moving fast. One of the men, still trembling, grabbed her wrist as she turned to leave. "You saved us," he rasped, eyes wide with disbelief. "Who the hell are you?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "I'm the mechanic." And she walked out. Hours later, back in the motorpool, her hands were once again stained with grease. Soldiers passed by, asking about vehicles, tossing jokes her way. No one knew what she had done in the canyon. No one suspected. And yet, as she tightened a bolt on an armored truck, her mind replayed the night. The faces of the men she had killed. The rasping gratitude of the man who had clutched her wrist. She told herself it was maintenance, preventive repair, problems fixed before they broke beyond control. But deep down, she knew it was something heavier. She was no longer just hiding. She was something else now, something the world didn't have a name for. And as the day wore on, as the engines roared back to life under her hands, she whispered to herself a truth she could never say aloud. This was only the beginning. Why did it feel heavier this time? Nova had asked herself that question 100 times in the days leading up to the mission. She'd executed 3 covert assignments since arriving at the Compartments Peninsula base. Each one precise, each one clean, each one invisible, packages rescued, assets neutralized, problems fixed. But this one was different. She could feel it in the silence before the briefing. She could see it in the guarded expressions of the intelligence officers as they laid the satellite photos across the table. And she could hear it in the tightness of Colonel Webb's voice, transmitted across a secure line. "High-value target," he said flatly. "Regional financier. Supplies 3 different militant groups with weapons, fuel, and money. He's the artery feeding this war. Cut him off and their operations bleed dry." Nova studied the photo, a man in his 50s, business suit, thick mustache, smiling on a balcony in a foreign city. He didn't look like an enemy. He looked like someone's uncle, someone who probably had grandchildren. "He won't be taken alive?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. The woman in the suit shook her head. "Political sensitivities. His capture would trigger questions we can't answer. His elimination must be clean, quiet, untraceable. Nova's jaw tightened. This wasn't maintenance. This wasn't repair. This was surgery. When? 72 hours, Webb said. You'll be inserted as supply support for the consulate. Your cover remains the same, mechanic. The moment is yours to choose. The briefing ended, but the weight didn't. It pressed down on Nova like lead as she returned to her motorpool. Engines clattered. Soldiers joked. The world spun as if nothing had shifted. But inside, she knew she was walking toward a line she hadn't crossed in years. Not a battlefield, not an ambush, an assassination. 3 nights later, she stood in a borrowed garage, her coveralls stained with grease she had smeared there deliberately. Around her, diplomats dined in a secure compound. Guards patrolled lazily, their rifles slung, their minds dulled by routine. And across the street, in a villa shielded by high walls, her target slept. Nova moved silently, scaling the back wall under cover of darkness. Her rifle rested against her shoulder, suppressor gleaming faintly in the moonlight. She reached the roof, crouched low, and steadied her breathing. Through the scope she saw him, the financier, the artery of a war, sitting at his desk in a white shirt, sipping tea, writing notes by lamplight. He looked ordinary, too ordinary. Nova's finger hovered on the trigger. This was what she had been sent for, what she had been trained to do, what she had done before, too many times to count. And yet something in her rebelled. She thought of the men she had killed in Kakovia. Fighters, mercenaries, combatants. She had faced them in darkness and chaos. They had weapons in their hands. She hadn't hesitated. But this man, he was unarmed, sitting at a desk, breathing like anyone else. Her chest tightened, her finger trembled. She forced herself to steady, to remember the mission, to remember the SEALs tied to chairs, beaten and bleeding, to remember the fires burning in compounds built with his money. She whispered under her breath, "This is maintenance, nothing more." And then she exhaled. The shot cracked, muffled by the suppressor. The window splintered. The man jerked once, slumped forward. The tea spilled across his desk, staining the notes he would never finish. Nova lowered the rifle. Her hands didn't shake, but her stomach turned. She melted back into the shadows, slipping from the roof, moving through the night unseen. By dawn, she was back in her garage, her coveralls dusty, her hands black with oil. To the soldiers around her, she was just wrench, tightening bolts, cursing at stubborn engines. But inside, she carried a silence that no grease could wash away. Hours later, her encrypted phone buzzed. Target eliminated. Well done, Phantom. Nova deleted the message, as always. But this time, her hands lingered on the phone. Her reflection stared back at her in the dark screen, sharp eyes, tired lines. She wondered if she was still the mechanic, or if she had become something else entirely. The questions wouldn't leave her, not that night, not the next. She dreamed of the man at the desk, his tea spilling, his hand twitching once, his face slack in death. She woke with the smell of grease in her nose, sweat clinging to her neck. And for the first time since she had accepted the network, she wondered if she could break. But the next day, another soldier walked into the motorpool, complaining about a transmission that wouldn't shift properly. And Nova wiped her hands, nodded, and bent over the engine. Because that was what they saw. That was all they could ever see. But inside, the storm kept building. And she knew sooner or later it would break. How long could she keep living 2 lives? The question haunted Nova as she sat alone in the motorpool, the lights low, the bay doors half open to the night. Engines loomed like shadows around her. The smell of oil clung to her hands. Somewhere in the distance, the base pulsed with life, soldiers laughing, boots marching, radios crackling. But here it was just her, and the silence. Weeks had passed since the financier fell across his desk. Weeks since she told herself it was maintenance, nothing more. And yet, The memory refused to fade. It clung tighter than the grease under her nails. Every mission left a mark, she knew that, but this one felt deeper, not because it had been harder but because it had been easy, too easy. And that terrified her. Her phone buzzed once, the vibration sharp against the metal bench. Another message, another directive, another problem to fix. She didn't open it right away. Instead, she closed her eyes and let the question press harder. Who was she really? The mechanic everyone ignored, or the ghost who erased problems in the dark? The truth was she was both, and neither. And the cost of being both was that no one ever really saw her. Not the soldiers who thanked her for repairing their trucks. Not the commanders who quietly signed her classified commendations. Not the captives she freed, whose last memory of her was a shadow pulling them from fire. She existed only in the space between necessary, invisible, unforgettable only to herself. That night she went out on another mission. The details hardly mattered: hostile cell, supply depot, weapons caches. She moved through it like muscle memory. Silent steps, precise shots, shadows falling without a sound. When she returned before dawn, her truck dust streaked, her hair damp with sweat. No one looked twice. She washed her hands, scrubbed away the blood that no one else could see, and picked up her wrench. The soldiers called her wrench again that morning. Someone joked about her smelling like fuel. Another slapped her shoulder, thanking her for keeping the fleet running. Major Davidson dropped by, telling her he didn't know what they'd do without her. She smiled faintly, nodded, and kept working. But inside, something had shifted. She realized she didn't need anyone to see her. Not really. What mattered was that she had seen them, the men and women who came back alive because she had walked into places no one else would go. She thought of Hayes, of the SEALs tied to chairs in Kakovia, of the contractors in the canyon, of the soldiers who drove away in armored trucks that wouldn't have started if she hadn't been there. That was enough. One evening, weeks later, Webb appeared at her bay. No briefing, no orders. Just him, leaning against the frame, his face worn but steady. "You're carrying it well," he said. Nova didn't look up from the engine she was tightening. Carrying what? The weight. Her hands paused, the silence stretched. Finally, she said, "It doesn't get lighter." "No," Webb admitted. "It never does, but it gets clearer." She set the wrench down and turned to him, grease smudging her cheek, her eyes sharp. "Clearer." He nodded. "You're not here to be seen. You're here to make sure others get home. That's the job. And sometimes the only clarity you'll get is knowing it mattered, even if no one knows it was you." Nova studied him for a long time. Then she nodded once and turned back to the engine. Neither spoke again. When Webb left, she stayed long after dark, the tools cold in her hands, the silence deep around her. And for the first time, she didn't feel broken by it. She felt steady. Weeks turned into months. Missions came and went. Each one carried the same rhythm: grease by day, ghosts by night. She stopped asking herself who she really was, stopped needing an answer. Because the truth was simple: she was both, and that contradiction was her strength. On the anniversary of Valkyrie, her phone buzzed with a single encrypted message. "Package delivered. Well done, Phantom." She deleted it without hesitation, wiped her hands, and leaned into another engine. Outside, the base kept moving. Soldiers laughed, radios hummed, engines roared. And in the quiet of her garage, Nova let the reflection settle in her chest like a truth too sharp to say aloud. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.